Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Colleen, and let's just get into some weird news. So, I thought today we'd take it a little different, and instead of doing our normal one topic kind of whole podcast, we're just gonna go through some weird news that I found. Some fun headlines I found that were attached to some very strange stories. Now, this first one I want to talk about takes us to the UK, to a friend that we should call, or we will be calling, Count Binface. Yes, you heard me correctly, Count Binface. Now, let's talk about Count Binface. So, Count Binface is a self-proclaimed fearless space warrior who ran against the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson in last year's general election. And now he has announced that he has plans to run for Mayor of London. Now, I'm gonna post a picture on the social media of this guy because literally he's wearing like a trash can on his face and like armor. It's really strange. But I'm going to post it on the Twitter and the Facebook, which is at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and GSMC Weird News on Facebook, just so you guys can see who I'm talking about, because this is pretty funny. So, he's vowing to take out the trash, and said he's throwing his bin into the ring because the race needed shaking up. Yeah. He also said that, it's the greatest capital city, or the greatest city on the planet. I call it the Earth's capital. As such, it needs people from outside Earth to pay its dues. Mayor of London is a fantastic title in itself, and as someone who already has a title, it suits me down to the ground. I don't know. This guy is hilarious, to say the least. Now, I think this is my favorite quote from this guy. It says, "You've already had a couple of mayors who people have said, 'Oh my God, what have we done?' Why not have someone who is already outlandish before they become mayor instead?" I think that's hilarious. You know what you're getting into when you elect Count Binface as mayor. You know he's a little crazy. So, I mean, I like that quote. I think it's pretty funny. So apparently he has a GoFundMe page and has already raised around £1,255, which is about $1,600. And yeah, that's, so he's raised a little bit of money. But this is pretty funny. I mean, this guy that's dressed up like a trash knight, basically, is running for mayor of London. I think this is hilarious. And there's a man named Rory Stewart, who was a former conservative who ran for the party's leadership only to be expelled for his opposition to the no-deal Brexit, but is running as an independent candidate. He reacted to Binface's announcement with this. He said, "No, I was almost winning. Come up into second place, convincing people that Khan, who's the active mayor, I believe, wasn't really the active mayor we needed for the future. Almost there, and now this unstoppable force is coming up on the inside." I think it's pretty funny. Obviously, he's mocking him, but this whole thing is pretty hilarious. So this mayoral, or I can never say that. This election for mayor is going to be held on the May 7th, 2020. And I think it'll be pretty funny to see how our friend Count Binface over here kind of just tries to wiggle his way to becoming mayor. I don't think he will, but this is just hilarious. I remember there was a guy who wore a boot on his head who was running for office in the US. I can't really remember his name, but this is kind of what that reminds me of. But Count Binface has a way better outfit, let me tell you. Now let's take a step away from our friend Count Binface and move on over to mysterious smells. So apparently there's a mystery smell that's been overwhelming Pennsylvania County again. So this is not the first time, and investigators are very confused. So apparently there's a mysterious stench in parts of Delaware County, Pennsylvania. It's just overwhelming residents with this pungent odor, and just all these investigators are really confused. So the smell has recently been reported in different towns across the county, which include Tinicum, Glenolden. I'm going to butcher these names. I'm so sorry if you live there. And Upper Darby, excuse me, just outside of Philadelphia. So no one knows what this elusive smell is or where it's coming from, but residents are describing it as like fuel-like. There's a resident named Terry Pelham who told one of the news outlets, it's like a sulfur smoky. As soon as I got out of the car, I could smell it. Another resident, Dana Delaney, said it was overwhelming. I was afraid to smoke. I was like, where is this coming from? I thought that the gas main had broken. So obviously this is a very gas kind of fuel-like smell, and people are just really confused and no one can figure out where it's coming from. And it's spanning such a large area. Apparently Delaware County residents have reported the smell like wafting in and out of neighborhoods over the last several months. So this isn't just like just now. This is like over the last several months. So apparently last October, the smell actually shut down several businesses, and a school in Chester before, moving on to Brookhaven in December. The most recent stench is consistent with the past records. So it's kind of like a similar scent, is what they're saying that this is. Now, Tim Boyce, who's the director of emergency services in Delaware County, said that the challenge we're up against when you're on the ground level is the wind can be blowing in different directions depending on where you are. By the time someone gets to where the report came from, it might not smell anymore. So it's the wind that's wafting it all over the place, making it really hard to kind of pinpoint the area that this stench is coming from. And so, someone's like, oh, I smell it here. They show up and then it doesn't smell like that anymore because the winds are changing. It's kind of crazy. But apparently investigators have been looking at local industrial facilities and pipelines in the area, but have yet to find a culprit. And the Odor Investigation Task Force, which I totally didn't know was a thing, which is a collaboration of agencies from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, is helping with the investigation. So it's kind of crazy, just in general, that there's a smell that people are smelling all over this area, like these different areas. It's the same smell that they're all reporting, and nobody can figure out what it is. But they do say it smells like gas, which could be very dangerous. Now, I do think it's kind of hilarious that they had to make an odor investigation task force for this specifically, but it's probably smart that they did, because this could be a seriously dangerous thing depending on where it's coming from or what it actually is. I don't know. I think this is kind of crazy, kind of weird. If any of you guys are from these areas, let me know. Hit me up on the social medias and let me know if you've smelt this before or if you've been hearing about this a lot. Let me know. I want to know. I am always on the social medias, which is at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and GSMC Weird News on Facebook. I am on both of those all the time. And if you're in these areas, let me know. Do you smell this? Have you smelt this? And describe it to me. I'm so curious. Honestly, I'm just super curious about this odd smell. Now I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more weird news stories that I have found on the interwebs today.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, I'm doing just plain old weird news stories that I found for 2020. So, let's talk about thousands and thousands of bees. Now, I have never been stung by more than one bee at a time, and every single time I've ever been stung by a bee or a wasp, it's been in the armpit, and I don't know why. I don't know if they're just attracted to my armpits or what it is, but that's every time I've been stung by a bee or a wasp or anything of the kind. It's always been in the armpit. I don't know why. But let's move on to Pasadena, California. So there was a 911 call over somebody getting stung by a bee in Pasadena, and this turned into a crazy situation. So, first responder firefighters were the first to show up. So around 4 p.m. on this day, someone called 911 about a person being stung by a bee near the city college. While only one person had been stung at the time, the caller observed several bees in the area and may have had a sense of things going completely in a bad direction. So the first firefighter to arrive to the scene started getting attacked by bees. Noting that the number of bees in the area at that point was absolutely massive. So there was a call over the radio that said there's a block-long swarm of bees. A block-long swarm of bees. That is insane. That is the most bees I've ever heard of in one area, besides like somewhere where they're, bee farms or something like that. But, so this firefighter's first thought was to run back to the vehicle to take cover from all these bees. But then they remembered that their partner that was still inside of the vehicle was allergic to bees, and this could be possibly a deadly threat to him. So ultimately they stood outside and got 15 to 20 bee stings. That's a lot of bee stings when you think about it. So the fire department called in police to kind of block off the area so that nobody could get hurt and they could deal with the situation. Responders used foam and CO2 extinguishers to try and disperse the bees. Some bees were killed, but probably not that many. And so apparently they said, we tried to do the best just to get them to fly away and dissipate. But public safety was their main concern. They ended up having to call in a beekeeper to the scene to remove the hive, which ended up being located between eaves and a roof of a hotel. So that the remaining bees wouldn't, return and hopefully make their home in a different location. They say they actually work with beekeepers often, which I thought was kind of interesting because that's not something that you, hear often. But, somebody said it was, they work with beekeepers often, but nothing to the magnitude that they had experienced that day. And that it was more like a scene out of a movie, which is insane if you think about it in those types of terms. So in all, 2 firefighters, 1 police officer, and 2 civilians went to hospital to be treated for the bee stings. Also, it was added that some other people were stung, but ended up declining medical assistance, so I assume that they were okay. So the beekeeper that was called to the scene estimated that there were between, get ready for this number, 30 and 40,000 bees. And they say that this was, that they were Africanized bees, which is a term used to refer to a hybrid of the African honeybee and European honeybee. And apparently, Africanized bees are generally more aggressive than other types of bees. And their nickname is Killer Bee. That's great. But can we take a second and stop and talk about the number of bees? Between 30 and 40,000 bees. That's a ridiculous number of bees. I saw that number and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. This is ridiculous. Could you imagine? You're just walking along the street, going about your day, you turn a corner and it's a block long of bees. I would be in the opposite direction so fast. A bee sting, I'm not allergic or anything like that. I know a lot of people who are, but I am not, luckily. But still, I would not want to be anywhere near that. A bee sting sucks. It hurts. It's not fun. And to imagine being stung by that many bees, that would be something that you definitely have to go to the hospital for. And I can assume that the people who didn't go to the hospital and refused medical attention were probably just a few bee stings and not like 20-something bee stings. Apparently officials said that they would be back to the hotel to check whether any bees were still living in the walls or anything like that, and that it would be fine. Also, bees are there to protect their hive. It's not anything against humans. They're not out to kill you. So these killer bees are, they're not out to get you, but they are out to protect what they're working so hard to keep sacred. That is so many bees. I feel so bad for this first firefighter on scene. Just like, oh man, just being the first one to show up and see this many bees, and they're like, okay, I got called in for 1 bee sting. What have I walked into? And then having to be like, okay, 1 bee sting, there are a lot more bees than this 911 call told me. I'm gonna turn around and go back. And they were nice enough to decide not to get in the vehicle and possibly bring other bees in, since they knew that their partner that was in the vehicle was allergic and it could be deadly. So this guy basically, or woman, I am not 100% sure, basically took these bee stings for their partner. It's kind of sweet if you think about it. But he ultimately got stung 15 to 20 times. That is so many times to be stung by a bee. That is ridiculous. Obviously, it's not 1 bee, it's multiple bees, but still, that's a lot of stings. A lot of stings, not good. Ooh, I couldn't imagine, and I bet that this partner of theirs that was in the vehicle was very, very fortunate and very, very thankful that they didn't decide to try and get in the car and possibly bring whatever bees were on them back into the vehicle, because that could have been deadly for the partner. I don't know. What do you guys think about this? I've never seen so many bees in my life. Have you ever been stung by more than just 1 bee? My husband was playing football years ago with my friends, or with friends at a park. They were running back and forth, and I was kind of just sitting on the side, and I watched him just run, and suddenly he hits the ground. Just boom. He had stepped on a bee, and it stung him directly in the foot, just took him out. And he was in so much pain from that. But I couldn't imagine just that 1 bee sting taking him down, could you imagine 20 bee stings? 20 bee stings. That's absolutely ridiculous. That is 20 too many bee stings. 20 too many bee stings. Now, before I just keep talking about bee stings, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some more weird news stories.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we've been talking about just weird news stories from our 2020, since we're in the beginning of this year, and we're hitting it hard with that weird news. So, let's move on over to North Carolina and talk about a plant that smells terrible but has a great use. So, apparently there's this plant that's called a skunk cabbage. You heard me right? Skunk cabbage. Excuse me. Now you're hearing me wrong because I'm saying it wrong. But, so apparently this cabbage thing smells absolutely disgusting. It's fatal if you eat it. So don't eat it. But apparently it is equipped with a chemical process that heats, up to over 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so it melts snow. So this is a great thing because it's been pretty cold in North Carolina, a little snowy, a little all that, and this is a warm-blooded plant that can raise the surrounding temperatures by as much as 20 degrees. So it's melting the snow, but apparently it absolutely stinks. So skunk cabbage gets its name from the fact that when its leaves are crushed or bruised, it gives off the smell of a skunk or rotting meat, which is absolutely disgusting. But apparently it's helping to melt the snow, which is kind of nice. Now there's a gardening site that says, in small doses, so this is about possibly eating this and like staying away from it at all because this is very dangerous. And it says in small doses or too small bites, the skunk cabbage plant can cause burning and swelling in the mouth and a choking sensation. Eating larger portions of the leaf can, in extreme cases, be fatal. So just if you're around this plant, don't eat it and know that it's kind of dangerous, but it will melt the snow around. And I thought it was pretty interesting and thought we would talk about that for a little bit. But let's move on to Florida. Now, this is a little bit of a nasty one. So apparently police in Gainesville are investigating after a contractor doing work on a home discovered half a dozen jars containing human tongues inside a crawl space beneath a residence. Ugh. Police were dispatched to this home, receiving a 911 call that human remains dating back to the 1960s had been found in this crawl space of this home belonging to the ex-wife of Dr. Ronald A. Bonham. I'm not 100% sure how to say that. Bonham? I don't know. But apparently on scene, investigators found, half a dozen plastic gallon-sized jars containing human tongues. There were labels on them, and the labels dated back to the 1960s. So that's how this person giving this 911 call knew that they were dating back so far, is because everything was labeled. Now, Bauman, or however you say his last name, is a world-renowned pathologist and former University of Florida professor. And he told them that that he had obtained these specimens as part of his research and brought them home with the intention of using them for additional work. And he ended up storing them in the crawl space because it was a cooler area. Now, Bauman's ex-wife owns the home and forgot the jars were beneath the house. They said that the tongues are used for research on thyroid and neck conditions and were meant to be brought back to the university. And there was a university spokesman who said, I don't know what the policies and laws would have been like 50 years ago or whatever. But I can tell you that today, that's not something that would be permitted. There are strict federal and state laws as well as university policies that prohibit that. It would be neither appropriate or legal for a faculty member or researcher to bring something like that home, which, yes, I would assume that this is not appropriate for anybody to bring home. That's disgusting. Police did not suspect any foul play, though, and are conducting tests on the specimen. It was not immediately clear how many tongues were found, but it was said that at least one jar contained more than one. So basically, this well-renowned pathologist and university professor had dozens or half a dozen plastic jars filled with tongues in his home that was found by a contractor that was doing work on the home and, called into the police. And then everybody's like, whoa, what were you doing? This is not okay. This is, ugh. First off, I can understand you're trying to do research, this and that, you want to bring your work home, that kind of thing, but why would you bring half a dozen jars full of tongues home? And that's not something that you should just forget about. I mean, I can understand how maybe the wife forgot about it because she's like, I don't even want to think that these are in my basement, or crawl space or whatever, And she's probably like, you know what, I just, put it out of my mind, didn't think about it. And then when they, divorced, he wasn't like, I'm keeping the tongues. He probably forgot about it too, honestly, if it's been so long. I don't know. This is disgusting. It's kind of weird. I mean, I've seen some weird stuff in jars just because, I don't know, I've almost bought weird things in jars just because I don't know. I like that kind of stuff. But this is on another level. This is like human tongues. This is not like pigs in jars, which is a thing. I've seen them. Or eyeballs in jars or brains in jars and stuff like that. But this is, this is a professor who's supposed to be, on his best behavior. And this is a well-known man and he's found with all these tongues. It's gonna, I don't know, that's gonna put a damper on anybody who goes to him or has been a student or anything like that, that kind of thing. I don't know. He's giving himself a bad name with this. I could understand if it was purely actually for research, but it does look really creepy when you kept so many tongues in your crawl space for such a long time. I don't know. I think it's ridiculous. And it does look bad on this guy. I mean, how could you keep any sort of weird jars? You know what? Let me rephrase that because, keeping things in weird jars is actually a hobby. But let me rephrase this. How can you keep a bunch of human tongues in weird jars and not be looked at like, man, this guy might be a murderer or a serial killer or a crazy doctor that's taking people's tongues, And if people just read the headline for this, which says Florida police investigate after several tongues preserved in jars found in crawl space, it's not a good look, especially if you're a well-known person. So just, I don't know, fair warning to those who are well known. If you've got some weird stuff, maybe explain it and don't go out there and be like, hey, I have this weird stuff, and someone comes into your home and they're like, man, did you know that this insert famous person named here, has 40 dead animals in jars in their home, like they're crazy. I don't know. That's kind of crazy. I want to know what you guys think. Hit me up on the social medias, let me know. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, maybe we'll talk about some more weird stuff. You know what? That's exactly what we're going to do.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we've been just talking some weird news stories. So, we talked about bees earlier on, but I want to bring it back to bees because that seems to be a theme here in 2020. So, we were talking about 30 to 40,000 bees. Now, let's talk about 150,000 bees. So apparently in Virginia, the Wildlife Control Company ended up sharing a photo of an 8-foot-long beehive that was found inside a living room ceiling. So Virginia Wildlife Management and Control said that there was a crew that was taken to a Richmond apartment building where the property owner had previously reported bees coming through the ducts. And according to the company's owner, Rich Perry, he said, they called me up a few days ago and said, there are bees still coming through the ductwork. We used saws to cut a 6-foot opening in the ceiling, and we kept having to make the hole bigger. The hive just kept on going. So the crew discovered that there was this hive living inside this, the ceiling in this living room. Apparently the apartment was unoccupied. Thank goodness. Could you imagine bees just coming through your ductwork and you're like, okay, this is terrifying. So apparently this thing was humongous and it was inside the building, which is actually really unusual. And, our friend from the Wildlife Control Company said, we've dealt with hives before on the outside of homes, and outside of walls, but never inside the ceiling. He said the hive was large enough for about 150,000 bees. But it wasn't fully occupied. But still, not being fully occupied, that's a lot of space for bees. Oh, man, that is so many bees. I thought this whole podcast is just going to be weird news about bees at this point. Cause good gosh, where are these bees coming from? I thought they were like going extinct. Maybe not. Maybe they're hiding in everybody's ceilings. This is terrifying. Let's move along from bees, finally, and come on over to Tennessee, where apparently wildlife officers were called about an injured bald eagle. And when they showed up to try and help this injured bald eagle, when they showed up to find this injured bald eagle, they arrive to find that honestly, it just ate too much and was too fat to fly. So the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and the wildlife officer Nathan Ripley and Justin Pinkston responded to this location where the witness had reported this injured bald eagle on the ground. They found the eagle in the woods near the road with no apparent injuries and actually very mobile. The officers ended up catching the bird to inspect it and decided that it just gorged itself on a meal and was only temporarily unable to create enough lift to fly. The officers just determined that he was too full to fly. The eagle would be able to fly on its own after taking some time to digest its meal, and it was relocated to a safe spot to finish this process. The agency said that the eagle's leg band informed them that it was 24 years old. So this 24-year-old eagle just was real hungry, had a serious meal, and then was just too fat to fly. He was just had that food baby going, and he could not do it. He just couldn't keep on going and was like, man, I gotta digest this. I can't get off the ground. I think this is pretty funny. It's kind of a cute story. I don't know. I just thought it was pretty funny. He's fine, thank goodness, because that would be terrifying if, you're that person who stumbles upon this eagle who looks injured and you're like, oh man, this thing is in some trouble. Like, I don't want to be the person that, found an eagle that's going to die or something. I don't know. That's gotta be some sort of bad omen, right? But it just turns out he just ate too much. That's me when I go and I eat way too much food, which is most of the time. And then I'm just like, okay, I can't move. Somebody carry me. That's me. I feel this eagle on a spiritual level, let me tell you. So let's move on over to Washington State and talk about another cute animal. Let's talk about a wandering sea lion. So apparently, authorities in Washington State came to the rescue of a sea lion that was found just wandering down a rural road about 2 miles from the nearest large body of water, excuse me. So apparently there were calls that started coming in around the evening reporting a sea lion on a road in southwest Cowlitz County. A wildlife officer with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife responded to the scene and confirmed that the animal was about 600 to 700 pound female Steller sea lion. Like I had said earlier, the sea lion was like 2 miles away from the nearest body of water. So the wildlife deputies and officers kept tabs on the sea lion overnight. And eventually the crews were able to corral the animal into a cage on a trailer where they checked it, it was in good health, and then they released it back out into the Columbian River. Could you imagine being one of those people who's just driving or walking along this road and you were like, oh, that's a sea lion. Why is there a sea lion here? And you're like calling the wildlife people, hey, so, I'm just taking a walk and there's a sea lion. What should I do? So obviously this is not, there was more than one person who called in about this sea lion. It was multiple, calls that came in and were like, hey, there's a sea lion, a huge sea lion. This thing was 600 to 700 pounds. I mean, sea lions are not small. They are large, large animals. So I feel like it would be a little terrifying to be just walking and then, oh, that's a sea lion. I'm in a forest and that's a sea lion. I don't know. I'm going to see if I can find a good picture and then put it on the Facebook and the Twitter. Once again, at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and GSMC Weird News on Facebook. But so you guys can see, this thing is adorable. I love a good sea lion. I do, but also it would be kind of scary to just walk up on a sea lion in a place that you are not expecting that type of animal whatsoever. That's gonna be actually kind of terrifying. Walking through the forest, having a good walk, it's a good day. Oh my gosh, that's a sea lion. I don't know. What would you guys do? Would you just like, turn around, I'm out? But I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some more weird news.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we've just been talking about some weird news stories. And while I was doing research, I found this list of 9 of the craziest seized items by Customs and Border Protection. So I thought we'd talk about that. Let's talk about this first one, which just had me mind blown. So this first one is live pigeons. So apparently customs officials stopped a 23-year-old Australian man after they discovered that he had 2 eggs in a vitamin container in his luggage. But it wasn't until they checked under his pant legs that they discovered pigeons, live pigeons, wrapped in padded envelopes and secured to each of the man's legs with a pair of tights. What? Like, that's ridiculous. This guy was trying to smuggle in live pigeons. So apparently this bird smuggler arrived in Australia on a flight, from Dubai, and this was in 2009 actually. And, he was charged with, wildlife smuggling, carrying a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison and a fine of about $70,000. I think this guy kind of deserves it, to be honest with you. First off, those poor pigeons. There's a picture I'm looking at here, and I'm not going to put it on either of the social medias because it's a little sad looking, but it's this poor pigeons. I feel bad for these pigeons, man. He was trying to smuggle on some live pigeons. I don't know why. I don't think anybody really knows why, but that's pretty sad. So let's move on to Egyptian mummy linen. So apparently, CBP officers in Michigan seized 5 jars of ancient mummy linen, coming illegally through the northern border. And this was in May 2019. Inspection of a shipment on a Canadian mail truck, revealed that illegal antiques believed to be from between 305 to 30 BCE, were on board. Like, the U.S. government, focused on, taking the artifacts and getting them back to Egypt. Which, first off, like, I get it, you want some cool stuff, but really, this is not the mummy, people. You can't just go and try and bring back some ancient artifacts because, you got them in whatever. Oh, man, Let's move on to this next one, which is live tarantulas. So apparently, a German man in 2011 ended up pleading guilty to shipping hundreds of live tarantulas into the U.S. through the mail. So Stephen Koppler admitted mailing about 247 live tarantulas to federal agents in L.A., who were posing as buyers as part of an investigation dubbed, get this is the best name for an investigation of this sort, Operation Spider-Man. Oh, I love it. Okay, so apparently this is a thing that happens, and I'm not surprised. People want tarantulas, people want pets, people want that kind of thing, and so these federal agents in LA started this Operation Spider-Man, still the best name for this type of operation, and they ended up contacting this guy and were like, hey, I wanted some tarantulas. And he sent them the tarantulas and ended up having to plead guilty to shipping them to the US through the mail, which is illegal. It is not 100% illegal to ship tarantulas. Let me tell you this. There are many a place where you can buy tarantulas and snakes and all that kind of fun stuff, from places in the US, but they have to be shipped properly. There's a whole situation for it, and you have to be like a reputable source that's shipping it. It's a whole thing. Let me tell you. I thought about getting a snake, and I really wanted one, and the only way that I could get this specific hognose snake that I wanted was to get it through the mail, but also that kind of, I don't know, it's a little iffy. I feel bad for these tarantulas. Spiders kind of freak me out. I love the way they look, but I don't want to touch it, kind of thing. And, but I feel bad for these poor tarantulas that were shipped through the mail, and even if it was to stop this guy, you still shipped a bunch of tarantulas to these people in LA. I don't know. Apparently this investigation began when a routine inspection revealed about 300 live tarantulas in a package that he had mailed to LA. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agents ended up placing more orders for spiders from this specific person and were sent a total of 5 packages containing dozens of live and unfortunately dead tarantulas. He was then arrested, this Koppler guy, after he had traveled to the U.S., to LA, which was months after sending these, and he ended up receiving a total of $300,000 from these tarantula sales to spider fanciers in dozens of countries. So this guy went down big for sending these spiders. And it goes to say, with any sort of animal that's going to be shipped to you in any sort of way, there is a possibility that they're not going to make it. And so I really do feel bad that he was shipping all of these spiders, and a lot of them probably didn't make it. Like, I don't know, I feel pretty bad. But let's move on to a man that was disguised as a car seat. No joke. So apparently, Mexican national Enrique Aguilar Conchola, I'm really bad at, sorry, but he was sewn into a passenger seat of a vehicle in an attempt to legally or illegally enter the U.S. So he was stopped at the San Ysidro, I don't know, sorry. I'm really bad at this. Border crossing in California in 2001, and was caught trying to hide and go through in a seat. I'm gonna take this picture, and I'm taking it now so I can put it on the social media so you can see this guy, because he looks absolutely ridiculous first off in this chair. But oh man, he's just, don't do that. Don't go and sew yourself into a chair. Apparently, this is actually super dangerous. And it began a kind of new type of way for compact spaces to be used for undocumented immigrants to try and squeeze their way into the United States. Don't do this. This is stupid. First off, this guy looks sad, and that's probably because he was pulled over and this is a picture being taken by a border agent, and they're probably also trying to get him out of this chair, to be honest. But this is not safe, and also just not a good way to try and get across the border. Like, out of all the ways that I've seen that people have talked about people trying to cross the border, this is the dumbest. He also looks like he's not very well put into that chair, and I think even if he was like kind of fully in the chair, you can very well tell there is something wrong with this seat in this vehicle. Like, man, Man, this is stupid. What was your name? Enrique? You dumb. Enrique, this was a bad mood. Bad move on your part, and just, oh man, this is just stupid. It's pretty funny and really weird, but just kind of altogether stupid. This is stupid. Oh my gosh. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we'll talk about some more of these craziest things that were seized by Customs and Border Patrol agents.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we've been talking about weird news, just weird news articles that I have stumbled upon. And I stumbled upon an article that was the 9 craziest things seized by Customs and Border Protection. So we've been talking about that right before the break, and we will continue talking about that. We just talked about the man who tried to disguise himself as a car seat to get through the border into the United States. Now let's move on to black market baloney. You heard me right. Black market baloney. So apparently in November 2019, CBP officers seized more than 150 pounds of deli meat at the port entry of El Paso, Texas. The CBP said bologna is prohibited, to cross the border due to its pork content. Pork products from overseas could introduce foreign animal diseases into the U.S., into the U.S.'s pork industry, excuse me. So this is why you can't bring bologna from out of state. Like, just get your bologna in state. Just saying. But, apparently the smuggler tried to tell officers that it was turkey ham when he was questioned about the rolls on the truck. So, when you're looking at these rolls, cause there is a photo, it looks like rolls of bologna, and I'm pretty sure it says bologna on it. So obviously these guys, these CBP officers were not fooled by this guy. Trying to smuggle 150 pounds of bologna into the United States. Who does that? First off, why do you need 150 pounds of bologna? What are you gonna do with 150 pounds of bologna? I promise you, you don't have enough friends to give 150 pounds of bologna too. And on top of that, why? Why is bologna, this bologna, so special to you? I don't know. I have so many questions about this. Let's move on to our next one, which is live songbirds. So apparently Sony Dong was arrested in 2016 for trying to smuggle endangered good luck songbirds into LA from Vietnam. He was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison in 2018, and ordered to pay a $5,500 fine after the judge said, the conditions in which the tiny birds were trafficked, which were once again taped to the legs and ankles, was deplorable. This is deplorable. This is absolutely terrible. This is the same as the other guy where he taped the birds to his ankles. Like, come on. These poor birds. But, man, I feel bad for the birds. But apparently in 2010, Dong had been sentenced to 4 months in prison after customs officers found 14 live Asian songbirds individually wrapped in cloth and strapped to his legs as he tried to pass through LAX after a 15-hour flight. So this is not the first time this guy tried to smuggle these songbirds in. This is the second time. Ugh. The tiny birds reportedly only cost a few dollars in Southeast Asia, but collect between $500 to $1,000 when sold illegally at Chinese markets in Southern California. Man, why do people keep smuggling birds in, and why are you attaching them to your ankles? This is absolutely terrible. These poor birds. I feel so bad for these birds. Man, stop doing that to birds. I know there are people out there that don't like birds, like my sister, she's terrified. But that doesn't mean you need to be mean to birds. My sister would never be mean to birds, and she's not a big fan of birds. Come on. Let's move on from birds and talk about a whole pig's head. Yeah, a whole pig's head. So apparently, CBP officer discovered a roasted pig's head and other remains at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in October 2018. A passenger traveling from Ecuador was relieved of his leftovers, and they were destroyed to avoid introducing foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, and other animal diseases that could come from this pig. There's a picture of this whole pig's head that it was roasted. They took a photo of it, and the dog behind it, which I assume is the dog that found this, who smelled this out, looks like he's so happy and he wants to eat it. I'm also going to keep this photo so that we can, so I can show you guys on the social media. So let's move on to some more bird stuff. So apparently dead birds for pet food. Yeah. So, Customs announced, that agents in DC seized a package of dead birds from the luggage of a passenger traveling from China. The CBP agricultural specialist investigated the passenger's bag and found the prohibited birds, which the passenger said were food for his cat. They seized this and destroyed it because this is diseases, you want to avoid spreading highly contagious bird flus. So, yeah, don't bring in dead bird that you're gonna feed your cat. That's just, I don't know. That's terrible. Let's move on. Let's move on to live tropical fish. So, apparently, this may have been the most daring attempt of all time. Customs officials stopped a woman in 2005 when she arrived in Melbourne off a flight from Singapore, where they found 51 live tropical fish in plastic bags tucked into a custom-made apron tied around her waist. This woman had 51 live tropical fish tied around her waist. During the search, custom officers actually became suspicious after hearing flipping noises coming from the vicinity of her waist. An examination ended up revealing that there were 15 plastic water-filled bags holding fish, concealed inside, an apron built specifically for these fish. So this woman needed, for some reason, 51 live tropical fish, so she made a special apron to hold them in to try and smuggle these fish. How were these people that are going to be checking your body not find these fish? You're basically handing them fish at this point. Come on. 51 tropical fish. Why do people keep wanting to smuggle in animals from other countries? Can we just stop that? That would be great. I mean, as always, I'm going to post any of the photos that I talked about in this podcast on the social medias, which is at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and the GSMC Weird News Facebook page. I'm always on those. Love to hear from you guys. Want to know your thoughts. Let me know of any weird news stories that you guys have heard about, anything that I haven't talked about, or just come say hi. Please, I'd love to talk to you. I really would. I'd love to talk to you. I'm always on them, always willing to talk. I want to see, I don't know, send me weird photos, but not like really weird, but kind of weird. Send me weird stuff. I love weird stuff. Tell me if there's any weird things happening in your area that you've heard stories for. Let me know. I'd love to know. And I want to thank you guys so much for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Colleen, and I will talk to you in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.